When you're
It's
talking about beats, that's actually something I really like in the last couple back and forth we've had. I realized I should have asked about way earlier because it's a fascinating part. I think the most consistent part of like whatever your look is you're very comfortable leaving a lot of page untouched, and your panels will kind of bounce around, and there's like a musical nature to how you do it. So you're saying beats, there's kind of
yeah,
that throughout your whole practice. What and that's from the jump. Like that's pretty much
yeah.
in all of your books. Can you talk more about that approach
Well,
to laying out a page?
yeah. So, and not that I haven't done like grid layouts. Like uh, Sprinkles is all like 6 panel grids throughout the entire thing, but I don't like it as a default in comics. Like a lot of it seems to be just like you default to this like grid. You default to like one panel starts in the top corner of one page, and the last panel is the bottom corner of the other page. And there's nothing wrong with it, but I just don't like the idea. I don't, you know, there's no reason why, especially now, like if you're doing web comics or you're doing your own print comics or whatever, there's no reason you have to do it that way. Like there was a time, I guess, if you're doing like a Sunday strip and they were like, you've got this amount of space and you have to fill all of it. Well, then okay, you have to fill all of it. But those rules don't really exist
Yeah.
anymore. Like nobody can tell me how many panels I need to put on a page or whatever. I can do it whatever I want. So like I don't love that as like a default mode that people get into. And then, yeah, I do think, especially early on, like I was not super confident in my drawing ability. And so I felt like I needed something compelling visually, even if the drawings themselves weren't going to be like the layout or the presentation of them could be more interesting. And then, as you get better at drawing, then you can get more creative with how you go about presenting things. And yeah, I also think it's like doing it the way I do it, it's sort of like there are some pages that, um, not that the layouts don't work, but they're not spectacular. It's just like an arrangement of panels. Sometimes you're sort of, however you choose to place the first panel will dictate everything else because, like I said, you have to be able to read it as you go. You can't like, oh, I'm going to put this one panel in the top left corner and then like, I don't know, another panel like on the bottom left. Like you still have to arrange it in a way where the page itself looks compelling. And I found that like even if most of the pages they'll look fine, there's still the potential for, like one page out of 20 or whatever that just looks like the layout of it is really nice to look at. And I think you don't get that if you're just going by a grid, or you're just
Yeah.
using the same page layout for every page. Like that's something you miss. You miss the chance to have one page that really like sets itself apart and feels really special within a larger work. And so like doing it this way, I think it leaves you the opportunity. And now like ideally, almost every page would feel that way, where like every
Yeah.
page felt substantial. And like maybe that's like the end game for me, is getting to the point where like within a book every page felt like, wow, this is something with some weight to it. But you know
From like a
you,
design standpoint,
yeah, yeah,
like that this page is also like a finished painting or a finished poster or something in
yeah,
terms of like quality graphic design.
yeah. And I think like for the most part, I honestly, I don't think about it too much. I just sort of like go with a feel for it. A lot of it is like a lot of the decisions I make, even when it comes to color or things like that, are just like, what decision did I make on the last comic, and do I want to do like the exact opposite of that just to keep it a little bit fresh. So sometimes I'll do that with page layouts, where it's like, okay, I started this page with like a wide rectangle panel in the top left. So then the next page, maybe I'll start with like a long rectangle, like a vertical rectangle in the top right, or like a nice huge page with establishing shot in the middle, and then go from there. And then you get into like, um, thinking like one of the things they teach you at SVA is like thinking about the size and amount of panels in terms of time. So like you get into like you have like a bunch of little panels and it feels like everything's happening very, very quickly. Or conversely to that, if you fill a page up with a bunch of panels, it slows the reader down because
Hmm.
you got all this information to process. Whereas if you have like a huge splash page or something, you can, turn those pages really quick because you're just getting this huge information all at once very quickly. So like, some of the things you play with that, you cluster some pages so they feel a little bit more dense um and then it does become like a visual component. Like I look at a page and it just feels like the flow of it is nice, or the overall design of it is nice. And that's it's very that part of it is very subjective. Like I'm sure, like
Yeah.
I know firsthand, like I've submitted to publishers who look at it and they're like, I don't like anything that's going on with these layouts. And it's like, well, then that's probably the end of the conversation because like uh, that's a huge, that's like the bedrock of of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I could see why people be like, what, like we could make this book half the length.
Yeah, but
It's
that's
why are we going to
yeah,
publish a book that's twice as long because you like this poetic kind of
yeah.
musical layout structure?
But that is part of it. Like you're not, the goal is not to tell the story as quick as you can. The goal, like I've had some complaints about like the pacing being too slow and whatnot. And it's like, but that's not like I didn't accidentally do that. You know what I mean? It's not like,
Yeah.
oh, I accidentally paced this thing very slowly. It's like that was the intention. So like you might not like it, but I'm not going to change it because of that. Like that's what I was hoping to accomplish with it, was to make it nice and slow. And yeah, I think that's another thing that sometimes gets lost is like, oh, is this the most efficient way of telling this story? Or like, did you need this stuff? And it's like, sometimes I will look at pages and think like, do I need this panel? Is it necessary? But like, there's a lot of other things that go into telling a story besides what's necessary. Like you also um, need to set the scene. You need to, like, especially with comics, like one thing that I definitely didn't think about to start with is like the changing from scene to scene, from page to page, where like in my mind I'm like, oh, this scene ends on this page and starts again on this page. But like a lot of that we just sort of know because we've read comics. But like
Yeah.
if you didn't and you look at it, you might be very confused if you don't, if you don't reestablish what this new scene is, and you don't
Yeah.
have some sort of thing that differentiates it, where it's like, or in certain, like for in Sprinkle's case, when I was first publishing Sprinkles, I was doing it in like, it was about 4 to 6 page chunks, and it was like that was that chapter or whatever. And then I didn't think about it, and then when I put it in a book together, it was just one page after the other. So those breaks didn't really exist anymore.
Mm,
So then you would see like the jump from one to the other, where like I maybe didn't establish a new scene because when it was posted, it would be 2 weeks later, and you wouldn't necessarily go from one to the other. And so when I was looking at the book, I was like, wow, I did not really consider like, if the jump from scene to scene flows as naturally in that form, because it wasn't how it was initially intended to be read.
yeah. But I think another thing that I notice in your work is you'll jump times sometimes without
Yeah.
acknowledging it. And you'll just let people kind of be in that state for a couple jumps, and then you're like, oh, okay, I got it. And like you're very trusting of your audience to be able to keep up with that stuff too, and not in a way where it's like a barrier. It's just like you're being drawn into it in a way that seems like kind of how things play out in real life, where you don't have all the information necessarily, and it takes a couple cycles back of talking to someone or whatever where you get the full picture.
Yeah, I also think like um that is one of the toughest lines to draw, not like a literal line to draw, but like a metaphorical line to draw. It was like how much to trust your audience, because you don't want
Mhm.
them to get lost, but also you do want them to be able to put certain things that you don't want to hold their hand, because that, as a reader, that's not as much fun either. If like you're just given all the answers as
Yeah.
though it's like a, like a Wikipedia article where you just, okay, I'm reading exactly how things go. You want to have those things where it's not completely spelled. You give them just enough to put it all together, but you don't give them too much where, because I think as a reader, you sort of, you want to feel like you're not creating it, but you want to feel like you're a part of it. And one way you could do that is by leaving just a little bit out, so they have to connect the dots a little bit. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's by jumping forward or ahead in time, and sometimes it's like skipping over scenes and then going back to them, or like um, one thing I'm a huge fan of doing is like giving you like the end of something first, and
Hmm.
then giving you like where it started beforehand, so that like you technically got both pieces of information just in the reverse order. So
Yeah.
you have to yourself either go back and reread it or remember it throughout. So yeah, I try to do as much of that as I can. If anything, it's funny because if anything, I feel like I don't do it enough. Like one of the things I've sort of noticed is I don't have that many comics that span like within the one story that span a huge chunk of time in and of themselves. Like
Yeah.
a lot of it is like very day to day, moment to moment, and it's like I don't really think about it when I'm writing. I'm not thinking like, oh, let me throw like a 2 year gap in between this. It's just sort of how I think about it. But yeah, I think more could be done with that because like it's like the portrayal of time is a key component of comics too. Like you can jump 10 years from panel to panel if you want to. You can, and then you can choose to put in like 10 years later so they know, or don't and let them figure it out. Like, you know, you have a lot of different avenues to go about that. And I wouldn't say I'm even like consistent in how I go about that. Like sometimes I will put in like the exact amount of time that's
Hmm.
passing or that clearly indicate the time has passed. And then sometimes I don't. And it's just like, I don't know, I think you just get a feel for it, and you get a feel for like how a certain thing plays out and what's gonna make the most interesting viewing of a story. Because a lot of stories, if you just presented them bare bones, start to finish, how they go, would kind of be a little bit boring, especially like the
Yeah.
kind of stories I'm telling. It's like a lot of them, there's not necessarily a lot going on. A lot of it's like how people are processing certain things, and like how you present that information is very important in terms of like what you want the reader to get across. Like how you present, whether you present a character as sympathetic or not sympathetic, like that goes a long way into determining how people feel about it.
Yeah. And all of these things that we've been talking about, like, build the totality of what your project is, and why, like, I'm so excited about it is that more than anything else, I feel like these are books that I will pick up and reread frequently because of the modularity of it. I don't have to have it in order. I can just grab a random one, and the more I come back to it, the more it will unfold. And that is throughout the project as a whole, but also, like you're saying, within a book, there's these strategies for, oh, I finish it, maybe I need to go reread it.
Yeah, like
And it's really
personally,
impressive.
personally, like I like I said, there are certain things that I can't experience in the way that like you can as the reader, because like I
Yeah.
know I know like I know from start to finish like what the end result's going to be. I know maybe what that character would do in a future story, even if I don't have the full plot. Like I have a vague idea of what's going to happen, but like I'd love the idea of like, depending on what order you even read them in, could completely depend, because like could change, like not reading them in the order that I put them out or like the chronological order, but maybe you read them in some other random order where where you
That's
read
what
like,
I did.
yeah, yeah, like you read an issue of like the end result of a character, and then you're like, okay, that was interesting, and then you go back and see like something that maybe feels like, oh, I already know what's going to happen, but like you're experiencing it in a different way. Like
Yeah, by
I
the
don't
time
need.
I got, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, 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 go ahead.
I was gonna say by the time because what I did literally is I just kind of read them by size down to smallest to
Mm.
biggest. Just the physical size of them, how they were in the stack, and I felt like, oh, I read them in the perfect order. But then by the time I got done with it, it was like, no, these are all like
Yeah,
any which way I scrambled, this would have been the perfect order, and that was really exciting to me. And then I actually even got kind of like the ones that are packaged together where there's like three or four short stories as like almost like I want to cut the book
yeah,
so I can have them on my shelf as three or four separate things. And that packaging idea was really interesting to me too, of like, well, you could put this all like the onions one in chronological order and you could sell it that way, or you could like have like each one as its own thing and have it on the shelf that way. And I again, I don't think they've done that with the Love and Rocket stuff to some extent, where there's like this repackagability of you can release it in the this is issue by issue as they came out, or this is all Jaime stuff, this is all Gilbert stuff. But I still don't think that their work, you could take each one and put it on the shelf in any which way and it would work. So there's something different about that that's really compelling.
yeah. And it's like some of what you're saying is just coming up against the practicalities of physical comics, where it's like
Oh yeah.
the collections of those stories are like they were meant to be presented individually, but then like you know it's like, oh, it costs a lot of money to print up each one of those comics. Are like the problem I've run into recently is like just a space on a table at a convention. Like
Yeah.
I just there's only so much of it, and so like a lot of these things started out as like series with individual issues that um, thankfully like the individual issues would sell out, and then I could put them all together in one thing just to clear up some space for other things.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's a really weird thing because like I don't know it. Not that like other mediums have like short pieces, but I think specifically with comics, like there's no page length that really is a standard. Like I guess in mainstream comics, there's the standard like 22 or whatever pages,
Yeah.
but for indie comics, like there's no, oh, this is the requirement for a short comic and this is the requirement for a long one. Like for a long time, I was basing the length of my comics on like most of the printing places. If you go over 64 pages, it goes from the saddle stitch to like a
Yeah.
flat glue thing. So I was like, okay, all my comics are going to be like 60 to 64 pages because that's cheaper. And I don't want to, I don't want to, if I go over by 10 pages, now each thing costs like $3 or $4 more individually. So it's like to keep costs down, but also like if you do like a bunch of 20-page comics and you get them printed in color, the price point is also sort of uh, skewed from that too, because
Yeah.
it makes more sense to have 40 or 60 pages or whatever than it does to have like 320 issue things.
Yeah.
And then even just like the selling of like this is so at my next convention is going to be Mocha this this upcoming one, and it's the first time I'm going to have like the finished Orange series, but like
Mm,
they're still in individual issues.
yeah.
So there's 8 of them. So it's like it's really hard to sell an 8 issue individual series because like most people don't want to buy all 8 at once.
Yeah.
But then so then they only want to buy like the first one or the first two or whatever. And then you get like there were times where I had like just issue 4, and people were like, "Well, I don't want to start at issue 4. I want, what came before." And it's like, okay, but I don't know if you understand how costly it is to have to keep all this, you know, the back catalog in print and whatnot.
Yeah.
So
And
like,
then if you packaged it like Orange as a graphic novel, you're looking at what, 300 pages, 200,
I think yeah, it's 422, I think.
400. So that's a big graphic novel. And then that's a
Yeah.
big ask at a con too, where most people are running from table to table with a limited budget. And you're talking about a 400-page book that's going to be 40, $50. And that's a big ask at a convention too.
Yeah. So that's like there's a lot of the practical thing when it comes to comics where like I like to give people a variety. Like, okay, like I've even started bringing back some of my like cheap black and white mini comics that I used to print out on like the printer at work, because like at the time I was like, that's the cheapest thing to do. And then as my work got sort of more like color based, it was like, well, I can't
Mm-hmm.
do that anymore because I'm losing something with not having color. But I brought them back just to be like, if you want to if you want to buy like everything, you can. If you want to just get one standalone issue, you can. If you want to get an entire full length story, you can. And if you want just like this cheap, dollar, or you want to just trade for this mini comic, like just giving people options, because each person sort of like there are some people that would see that book all together and be like, oh yeah, I just want the whole thing together. And then there's other people that are like, no, I want to read like the first part and I'll see if I want to go any further.
Yeah.
Like, and I get that, because like you don't want to spend like, I don't know, like to get every issue of that series is going to be like probably close to $100, because especially the later ones, they're like 50, 60 pages each. So, you know, they're going to be, I think I saw them for like $12 each or something like that. And so, like, if you wanted to just get all of them at once, it's like a pretty big financial commitment. So you might just want to dip your toe in with just the first one. And I absolutely get that. I prefer to give people as many different options as they can. That's why um, I think digital comics are a great way to go about it, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't have any of the production costs that like that's why I have my Patreon. It's like you can go and read stuff there for very little money.
Yeah.
And but like some people really want things in print, and you gotta have that option as well. But
Yeah. We've been going for a long time, which I really appreciate. But if
yeah,
you do have some more time still, that was like one of the other big things I wanted to talk to you about is the practical struggles of self-publishing, especially because when I got your work, and some of it is like I just haven't been, there was a long period where I didn't have money, I didn't have a full-time job and stuff, so I wasn't paying as much attention to comics. But when I got through and I read it all and processed what this was, I was like, why the fuck haven't I heard about this? Like, and like it just seemed that there was a lot of practical things, especially with the type of project you have, where it would be hard for people to understand the totality of it. Like if they read one or two books and those characters didn't happen to link over, I could see why people would be like, yeah, that was a nice comic, well drawn, well told, but they wouldn't get that like, fuck, I got to tell people about this because they don't
mhm.
understand the scope. Can you talk about like just the practical shit you've run into over the last 10 years of trying to put your stuff out there and get I mean, I don't want you to like sit there and be like, people should be, like I'm
Oh
not
yeah,
trying to.
no, they should read it all. Yeah, they should all stop by my table at Mocha and buy
Yeah,
each.
you
Yeah,
you
yeah.
should. But I
No,
just imagine that it must be kind of frustrating to be like, this. I'm assuming like the kind of special thing this is. Like it's got to be kind of
well,
frustrating of how hard it is to get people to see the totality of what you're up to.
yeah, yeah. It's more so like I I wouldn't say like I, I don't want to try to sound like super humble, but like I don't really have a firm grasp on a lot of this, like how people will react to it, because some people react like nothing, and some people have been like, wow, this is really good. And so I've sort of, okay, I don't exactly know which end of that it probably depends on which things you read and when you read them and whatnot. But like the practical side of comics is such a pain, because especially like, even just going about self-publishing, like you don't know what you're doing until you do it, you got
Hmm.
to learn as you go. So then like now I'm starting to think like printing up individual issues, like Katie Color is like a 5 issue thing. And now, because of the gap in convention schedule, I'm going to have issues 4 and 5 premiere together at Mocha, and it's going to be a done complete series. And it's like, in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have printed up each individual thing. Maybe I should have waited and just printed up one book, because like it probably would have been cheaper that way, but I would have had to wait 3 years. So, everything comes with its pros and cons, because like people, not that they get mad at you, but like you see, if you start a series and then, you know, people will be like, well, when's it going to be done? Like when I did Orange, like I took like a 3 year break from issue 3 to issue 4.
Hmm.
And there were times where people were like, well, I got issue 3 and where's issue 4? And it's like, oh, well, I'm doing this other stuff in between. And it's like, if you were reading that, you don't want to hear about other stuff. You're like, I want to continue reading this. And it's like, well, I wasn't really feeling like doing that at the time. So like ultimately I get to make those decisions. But like
Yeah.
you do, I mean, me in particular, like I just made a lot of missteps in terms of, or not even missteps, but just like, sometimes it comes down to like I said, I was making them with the idea of like a length in mind for an individual issue. And then at a time when like a lot of the things that were getting published were full length books, and it's like, is this a full length book? And it's like, if you put a bunch of them together, it kind of is, but not necessarily. And then, you know, so there's things like that where you think you're making the best decision at the time, and then you look back and it's like, "Ah, I wish I had kind of done that a little bit differently," or, like I didn't, um, for a while I was doing like publishing comics online in like these bursts, like either chapters or full issues or whatever. And then when I moved to Patreon and I started doing the one page at a time, that's when it really clicked, like, oh, this is the perfect way for me to go about this, where I can do one page at a time in a schedule order. And if you want to read them one at a time, you can read them one at a time. If you want to wait and read a whole chunk of them, like you can do that too. You can read it any way you want, because there are some people that really don't want to start a story unless they can read to the end.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can understand that, but also like that's, these things take like a long time, so you can't just start and stop in a week's time or whatever. Like these things take years and years to do. And so then you go like, okay, well, am I gonna not show anything from this for 10 years or something like that? Like you're never
Yeah.
gonna see anything from it, and then all of a sudden it's completely done. Because the other thing that you get sometimes is, sometimes I would publish like a 60-page comic online, and the reaction you get is like someone just quickly reads through it and is like, oh, okay, that was good. And it's like, I worked for like a full year on that, and it's just gone like that.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of the practical side of things that just, make comics really difficult. Like, especially, like when you do print runs or whatever, it's like, you can keep the individual costs down if you have these huge print runs and
Yeah.
whatnot. But then it's like, okay, but you need like $10,000 to start with to print that book up in an amount of copies, and then you need like space to store those things, and then sure, then you can sell them at a price where you can, make a pretty decent buck back when you sell them. But like I don't have that I don't have that money to start with. I have to do my print runs very small, and then you don't want to sell them for outrageous figures because people are going to walk by and be like, why should I buy this 300-page book at this price when two tables over I can get something that same length for half the price?
Yeah.
So it's like a really difficult balancing act that you got to find. And once you figure out one thing and you feel like, oh my God, I figured it out, I know what I'm doing, then you go to another show and like the things you figured out don't sell well, and something else sells well or whatever, and you completely, oh, I got to rethink my entire strategy. I have no, and so it's a lot of like, um, especially when you're mostly selling them through conventions and whatnot, like they're pretty small sample sizes. Like, you could sell really well one year and really poorly the next, and there's nothing to be learned from it. It's just like, it could be where your table was. It could be,
Yeah.
it's a particular show where a bunch of famous cartoonists are releasing new work and people just run out of money before they get to you. Like it could
Yeah.
be like the first Mocha after when it came back after the pandemic, like people were just it felt like people were just throwing money around. Like they were just buying up everything in sight. And it's like, who knew? People didn't even know if people were going to show up for conventions at that
Yeah.
point. It's like I don't know. I think it's like a very confusing like thing to navigate while you're also, you're the one working on the stuff and you're the person promoting it and you're the one, if someone buys something from you online, you're the one shipping it. And it's like all these little things that it's like, well, I definitely wanted to be a cartoonist. I don't know if I wanted to be all these other things. And
Yeah, the businessman.
yeah,
Um, and I get the sense that the conventions are the primary way that you're building the audience and the primary way that you sell work and all of that.
yeah, yeah.
How many
I'm
conventions are you doing a year?
Well, I typically would only do at most like three,
Okay.
because I typically only go to the ones I can drive to. So like Mice in Boston is like I'll do that every once in a while, because I usually have a policy where like you can't do it at back-to-back years. And then
Okay.
like SPX I try to do, and then but you don't know if you're it's not a guarantee that you'll get into SPX, so it's
Unless
not
you're
one that you.
Fantagraphics, they somehow always get drawn on the
Well, yeah,
lottery.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's a weighted lottery, let's say.
Yeah.
But then but Mocha is the one that so like part of it is possibly like the first year they introduced like their awards of excellence. One of my comics won that very
Hmm.
first year, and I've always gotten in. I don't know if it has anything to do with that or if it's just like if you apply you get it. I don't know how they do that over there, but I know I've never not gotten in when I've applied. So at least I have one constant, and it's also the closest one to me, and it's the easiest one to get to. And so that's sort of the major one that I build everything else off of, because the other ones are like they're inconsistent in terms of whether you're gonna even be able to go, and then they're also like if you go to them, you got to pay for gas and you got to pay for hotels and you got to travel and you got to take time off, and it's like all these other factors
Oh,
that yeah,
it's crazy. It seems wildly limiting. Like, I mean, for me to go to Mocha, I live in Alabama, and like the only reason I was able to go is because they had me on a panel for some talking about AI shit. And so then, yeah, but that's like a $2,000 trip for me to go and get a hotel and stay for a couple days. And I only do that because like I teach, and at a college, you could just write it off as professional development and you can get the school to pay for it. But
yeah,
I'm thinking, how the fuck, like it just seems so limiting, like that your audience is limited to, okay, I can drive, in the New York area. But like you're never going to get the Seattle short run people,
yeah.
because
Well, like
to fly there to ship
yeah,
to ship boxes, like that was the other thing. I was watching Sean coming from Minneapolis to Mocha, and he had to ship, and I mean, living the line, especially like a year ago, didn't have that many books out, but you got to ship a chunk of boxes of books, and books are heavy, and then you got to drive there, and and then you got to pay for the table. Like, how is anyone making money at this? It just seems like a really crazy model to be
Yeah.
successful in.
Well, like for example, like Mocha used to get um I mean, part of it's warranted. Like the Mocha tables used to just be like way more expensive than other similar conventions. And so a lot of people from out of town would be like, I don't know if I want to do this because like the table cost is way, and then like hotels in New York are, you know, outrageous. But for me, I was like, well, I've either lived in Brooklyn or New Jersey, so like I don't have to pay for a hotel. I don't have to really pay for travel. Like I have a bus pass because I work in the city, so I have a bus pass to the city that I can just use. So I don't even have to pay for a bus ticket in. And then like, I don't have to ship my books because I can just wheel them over. Like I was just, putting them on the bus or wheeling them over from my apartment or whatever. So like there's practical. It's all like that's the thing. Like people are always telling me specifically like short run or like back in there used to be this one. I don't know if it even still exists. Called Staple in Austin. I remember when they
Mm.
first started it in Austin, Texas. Like the people came to Mice and they were like, "We're doing this show. You should come and do it." And I was like, "Well, I'd love to, but I don't know how I'm getting to Austin, Texas. Like, I mean, obviously I would fly, but like that's a huge chunk of money and like
Well, and how you get the books there then too,
yeah, how
like,
you get the books there, and then you got to pay for the table, and you got to pay for food while you're there, and then you go there, and you don't even know if you're going to sell all that much, especially when a show's first starting out or you're first starting out. So it's like there's a lot of, you know, there's been sort of a push towards like these digital comic conventions now, where it's like, like Shortbox does their fair, where it's like, just purchasing things online, and it's like I get the sense that a lot of people really like having that in person, um, where you could physically pick up something and look at it. And at conventions, like if you're a fan of my work, it's just me behind the table. You can just walk right up and if you wanted to, like if you're watching a movie or whatever, and you have a question for the director, like you got to find like a Q&A with them or whatever. You don't have just like access to, or maybe you could email them and they'll respond. But like
yeah.
these are the sorts of things where it's like you're walking up and you're seeing the physical stuff and you're seeing the person who makes it by and large. And uh, that's a well, it wouldn't be appealing to me because I wouldn't want to talk to like if I was just a cartoon, like a person who read comics, like I'd be terrified to go up to the creators and start asking questions and stuff. I would just like
Yeah,
very quietly buy my books and walk away.
which is kind of how I am even as a cartoonist. Like, I pretty much, I'm sure I was also running around like trying to see everything, spend a bunch of money, and then get back to the own table I was supposed to be at. But I
Yeah.
mean, that was pretty much how I went up. I was like, give me that. All right, thanks, bye. And like, yeah, that interaction's weird, but I
Well, it's
I,
also
I
like
see.
part of the issue is like depending on the type of like my comics are typically like more story driven, more character driven, and it's like it's not as easy to get across the quality of that selling it just like on a table or whatever,
Yeah,
because mostly what you're looking at is you're looking at the cover. That's I don't know what percentage of sales just how good the cover looks are, but it's probably the highest percentage. It's just like that
yeah,
cover looks nice. I'm intrigued. And then like maybe they'll flip through, you know, the interior pages a little bit. Like some people will read like I'll put like a little plot blurb on the back, so they'll read that and see. Most people just ask you what they're about, and they might ask you like, especially like on at conventions where I have like 20 or whatever comics, and they'll start asking you like what each individual thing is about, and
wow,
it's like well, we don't have all day here. I'm
Yeah.
not going to get into like plots of 20 different things, but like it it's not necessarily, I don't know how to make it better, but it's definitely not the best way to go about it. Like you're really basing a lot on like the color scheme is nice. Let me take a look at it. You know what I mean? Or like
Oh
maybe,
yeah, totally.
yeah. And it's like you can't necessarily like I can't just tell people like I think it's a very compelling narrative. And I think you like the more of it you read, the better it's gonna be. Cause it's tough to
Yeah.
get past like trying to sell it without trying to sound like just a salesman of like, you know, like people be like, what do you recommend? And it's like the most expensive thing on the table. That's what you should buy. Or like the the thing I want to carry home the least. Like, yeah, that sounds like the way to go.
Yeah, which I mean, that's I know I must have just walked up, seen a couple of the covers, gone Brett, and like that looks like competent cartooning. I like the colors and like
Yeah,
fuck it, give me everything because I had the ability to do that. But yeah, like on the other side of it, imagining I could only buy one. Yeah, and it's especially for what you're doing. And then the longer you go, the worse the problem gets, right? Like, what should I
yeah,
buy first? Well, I have I mean, imagine another 25 years from now. You're like, I got 35 years worth of production, and it's
yeah.
really best consumed all at once. So
It's
the longer you go, the harder it gets to get anyone in on the totality.
yeah, it's there are certain aspects of it that um feel sort of stupid to even talk about, but like part of the like part of the reason um like there is a practical element to like how many comics should I do this year? Because like
Yeah.
you don't, like are you going to show up to a convention? Like for me, I was at SPX, but I didn't have my own table, so I just had like one thing to sell. So when I go to Mocha, I might have like 10, legitimately like 10 new things to sell. And it's like that's a really hard thing to do at a convention is, because a lot of times people be like, what's new? And I'll have to be like, well, this and this and this and this and this. And it's like it becomes a whole like overwhelming, like, oh, I just wanted you to point to one thing and like let me zero in on that.
Yeah.
But like, yeah. And then you gotta, I don't even attempt to figure this out because I don't like, these are strangers to me. But like if you ask me like where do I start? It's like, well, it depends on what your interests are, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like I don't necessarily even know at this point what would be a good starting point because you might buy like my 30th comic and that might be your starting point. And I would have never considered that as a starting point, but that's that's what you got.
Yeah. Well, I mean, luckily for you, you kind of have that where every book is its own entrance and its own complete
Yeah.
story on its own. But yeah, it's a really weird thing. And that's why I wanted to, again, like just really try and get this interview and show people the totality of the work, because that's where like the realization of what you're dealing with really comes into play is but I think it's also like the biggest hurdle you have to overcome
Yeah, like
is getting people to
asking,
see
yeah,
to
asking
see
people
the
like
totality.
read like, yeah, here's 2,000 pages and get to work on it. That's like
Yeah.
it's a lot. It really is. Like even like people complain about this with like superhero comics or whatever, where it's like, oh, I want to start reading Spider-Man comics, and it's like, oh, okay, here's uh what is it, 50, 60 years worth of backlog, and it's like, who, you obviously have a few standouts, but like a lot of it is sequential and like sometimes you just jump in midway. I do think people sort of underrate how easy it is to just jump in the middle of something. Like
Yeah.
I think people think like oh my god, I'm gonna be so lost, and it's like for the most part I feel like you're probably smart enough to sort of like even in the middle of the sea, like the first time I ever watched Mad Men, I think I just put on some random episode And I was like, I don't know who any of these people are, but like as you watch it, you figure it out, and you figure out, you know, who characters are and what they're like, and then sometimes it's actually even rewarding to see something in the middle, and then you get to see how it ends, and then you get to go back and wow, they started from this point and got here. Like it gives you just a different view on things where you're not just looking at it linearly, you're
Yeah.
also looking at it from this other perspective, which like some fictional things are just meant to be watched out of order or whatever, but then sometimes you do it accidentally, and it's like, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, you just get a whole different view of it.
Yeah, I'm a pretty OCD. Like I've got to see episode one first and
Yeah,
go through. But I think your work provided that structure for me where it didn't really matter. But you're right. There's something funny about that because we don't show up to like a new workplace and be like, well, this person's got 35 years of fucking life that I don't know about that I need to know
yeah,
about before I can interact with them at work.
yeah.
You gotta
But
just like
you
learn
learn
as you
about it.
go.
Yeah, you learn as you go. You as you know, because like when you first meet somebody, for the most part, they're not going to open up to you about everything going on in their lives. You have to build a connection and go forward with it. But yeah, I will say, for as much as I'm saying that you can do that, I also don't like to. I like to start from the beginning. But like an example I've got is if you're familiar with the comic Pope Hats, that you know, like the first.
Um,
Uh, there you go. See, like the first one I ever read was issue 3, and
Reviews
yeah.
coming soon.
Oh, there you go.
I
That's a
just
good
got these
teaser.
like 2 days ago. Yeah.
Okay. But like the first one I ever read was issue 3. And I read it and I was like, this is maybe the best individual comic that I've ever read in my, like I loved it so much.
That's
And
good shit.
then like at the time there was like issue 2 was out of stock, and I ended up meeting the cartoonist behind it, and he like sent me a copy of the second one. And it was only then that I found out that like issues 2 and 3 are like part 1 and part 2 of a story. So I had just read the second part without ever knowing there was apart, and then like the first issue also has the same character, but like there really is one story in 2 issues, and I didn't know, and it didn't impact my enjoyment of it at all. It was just sort of like, oh, there was a before part to this that I didn't even know about. So like I do think you can probably just, you know jump in. Maybe it doesn't work for everything. Maybe there are some things where you just jump in and you're just so lost, and you know you'd have to
Well, and
backtrack
I
so
think that
far.
just speaks to like you and Hartley Lynn and really good. I mean, yeah, this is I mean, you, Hartley Lynn, there's some other people, Alex Nall, I just did an interview with, who were just these fucking fantastic writers and fantastic cartoonists that are good enough where you can do that. And I think that's a credit more to the creators than
Well, I do
really.
think I do think you have to make as a creator, you have to make that choice, that like um whether, okay, if you jump right in, like any, like the way I have Orange structured is, in my mind, and people don't believe this, what I, they think I'm just trying to sell them on, like, yeah, just pick whichever one. But like in my mind, each individual issue should function to some degree on its own, and like each individual issue has its own structures to it, and its own pacing to it, and like its own start and stop to it. And if I did it correctly, you should be able to pick up issue 8, know nothing about what came before, and at least get a sense of it, or it, even if you don't, to come away with something. Like that's how it should work. Like I said, it's one of the tougher things to figure out as a creator, because you just can't know. Like
Yeah.
you have all the information in your head already. You can't actually know what it's like to experience the midway point of a character actually at the midway point, but that's the starting point for you. Like you can't experience that.
Does that
And
ever bum you out? Like I found as an artist that a lot of the reason I make something is because it's what I want, but I'm not finding it. So it's like, okay, I got to be the one to do it. but then yeah, like there's not that ability to just enjoy the thing that
Oh,
you.
not even just enjoy it. I can't stand reading my comics. Like I even just um I actually I think this was to their detriment for a while where I just really wouldn't read them as comics. And then when I
Mm,
got them assembled, I would read them and I was like some of the transitions from scene to scene, I was even in some of them I was even like that's a bit jarring and I wish I had read this as a story. I would have maybe changed a little bit, but I was just focused on getting one page done after the other. But yeah, I really that's why when I was trying to finish Orange and I had to read through the whole first like 400 something pages just to formulate an ending. I was like a thing I kept putting off, and I eventually I had like a bus ride. I was going to a Mets game, and I had the bus ride into the city, and I was like I had the PDF on my phone, and I was like, you have nothing else to do. You just have to sit there and read through it, and but yeah, I find it very I don't enjoy reading my own stuff, even though hypothetically, like if I could separate myself into two people, I would hope that I would be a big fan of my work because
yeah.
like you a lot of the connecting the stuff like I do that because I enjoy that in stories. Like I like that. I like when characters pop up in other places, and I like when you know I think like the terms like prequels and sequels I think get like a bad rap because many of them are made very cynically. Like
Yeah.
certain movies we were talking about before we started recording, but like they're made with
Indiana
like
Jones.
they're made with a very cynical like we're just looking to make money, so we're
Yeah.
the story should be over, but we just decided it's not. And so, but like if it happens organically, like there's perfectly like it's sort of one of the things I've grown more fascinated by the longer I've been doing comics is the idea of like you read a story and then it wraps up and you're like that's it, but that's not how your life works. Like you
Yeah.
have moments where it feels like you get some sense of closure and like oh I've really come to terms with this, but then you wake up the next day and it could be right back in your lap. Like you can't actually you can move on, quote unquote, but like you're still who you are from one day to the next. And like, um, I think that you can do fascinating things with that in stories where it's like you see, um, like in the quasi series I've got Bottle Caps, where it's like not a strict series, but a lot of it follows from one to the other. The first story I wrote for that was like these two characters that met each other and sort of became a couple and whatever. And it's like it could have just ended there and it would have been fine. But then also it's like, okay, but what happened? What do they go through next? Like, well, let's check in 2 years and see how it's going, and let's check in 5 years and see how it's going. And like, um, there's a lot you can do with that. There's a lot of seeing characters change and seeing how they grow over time, and
I
not
think a
that you.
lot of people overlook that because there's a lot of people stick with that early stuff, the high school drama, the childhood trauma, the early relationships, and I don't see a lot where people follow older into life. And I guess now that I'm getting into my 40s, I'm experiencing those things where you think you've really grown as a person, and then you look back at something you wrote when you were 22 and you're like, fuck, I forgot about that. Like I thought that
Yeah.
was a concern of mine over the last 2 or 3 years. I just have different language for it now, but wow, I really have chewed on that, and I don't see a lot of that in work.
Yeah, so like I get why some people want to like do a story, wrap it up, put it away, and then the next thing you work on is completely fresh. But like there, I do think there is something to be said for like, you know, like I think of like even these like big fantasy stories or whatever, and it's like good versus evil, and then like, good triumphs and defeats evil, and then everything's just great for the rest of time. And then you sit there and you're like, Is it though? Because like I feel like there's a lot of, like there's probably a lot of problems still going on, and like
Yeah.
wouldn't that sort of be, and I know like a lot of media today especially is like very irony based, and like, oh, these things that you thought were good, or what if they were actually like a lot of the superhero stuff now is like, well, what if those superheroes that you thought were the good guys, they're actually the bad guys? And it's like, well, that's the kind of stuff I read like in high school. So like I feel like I've moved on from that, but I guess we're just getting there now. But like
Yeah. In
but like
movies and stuff. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's
But it's
I've had people come to me and be like, "Oh, you like comics?" I remember that Bruce Willis movie come out, and it was like it's like a
surrogates
guy's which
or
one?
surrogates or
No, the
okay.
Untouchable, the M Night
Oh, Unbreakable.
yeah,
Yeah.
Unbreakable. And I had people that like knew I love comics, and they're like, "Hey, it's a superhero, but he doesn't wear a costume.
Yeah.
Like this is so fresh, it's so interesting. You must love it." And I was like, "No, that movie fucking sucked." And they're like, "How could you not like it? It's such an interesting take." But we did that in the 80s, like or
Yeah.
earlier. Like I don't, yeah, I agree. It's that
It's
whole deconstructing the superhero thing that's happening in the movies is pretty like
well like my favorite individual genre is horror, and like a lot like the a lot of the horror that gets made now are by people who are probably about my age and like grew up with Scream, where Scream was like the deconstructing the horror genre. So
mm-hmm,
now a lot of people who are making movies now, it's like deconstructing the deconstruction, or like, you know,
yeah,
this winking, like, they know what's going to happen, so they are, well, actually it's not going to happen, something totally different is going to happen. And it's like
yeah,
sometimes you take a step back and you're like, yeah, but just doing something because it's the opposite of what you expect is like not always as rewarding in a viewing experience as you think it's going to be. Like,
yeah,
you get some things where it's like that first time you see it, it's like, wow, that was really something. And then you watch it back and it's like, yeah, but now you see the pieces don't necessarily connect. And like the first time you hear the jokes, maybe they're good, but like, they don't hit as well the second time. And yeah, I don't even know how we got to that point. But anyway, getting back to the thing is like I think there's a lot of avenues that comics can provide you. And part of the thing with comics is like you were saying before, that like you could do them on your own, you know.
yeah,
Like if you I guess you can write a book on your own, but then you still gotta like pass it through an editor. I guess at this point you can just publish it online too.
yeah.
I've talked to a few authors who seem to really like not know what to do with that, where like, web comics became such a huge thing, but I don't get the sense that like just publishing like a full-length novel or something on your blog like caught on in that exact same way.
No, there's like Amazon print on demand, which a lot of people use, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's not quite the same thing as
Yeah.
like yeah, like a chapter every 2 weeks or
Yeah.
yeah. I don't read as many novels though either, so I could just be divorced from what's going on
Oh,
in the world.
absolutely. But like comics are, or I guess like you could make the argument that maybe if it was like a better paying industry, you could have more of like a team working on things. But like I kind of like just being able to do everything on my own, because I get to, you know, it's a lot easier to control. Um, like those little moments that you just sprinkle throughout, or you figure out as you go, that like I don't know if you're working with a tandem, if that's going to happen. Like I'll have things where like I'll write the script, and then as I'm drawing it, I'll realize halfway through, like, oh shit, that's not going to work. I'm going to have to go back and rewrite that. And I don't know, if you're like the screenwriter of a movie and you sort of like finish your draft and hand it in, and you know you the version you might see on the screen might be totally different from what you had in your head. And like at least with comics you have a much greater control of that, because you can make it look however you, well, I mean, like within your talent level you can make it look however you want. If you want to, you can even you can choose the way it's presented. Like I've got a comic coming up that I don't know how I'm gonna do it digitally, but like in print, it's a part one and part two, but they take place at the same time. So I
Mm,
think how I'm gonna get it printed is um, it's one way going this way, and then flipped, and then going that way. So like you could, depending on how whatever side you picked up first would be the one you read first, and then
mm-hmm.
you flip it over and read what would be the first or second part or whatever. And so like I have an idea of how that looks in print, but like digitally, I don't think like it's not gonna be like a PDF where you have to like
Flip it.
rotate it, scroll to the bottom, and then start back up. So like, so just within that, like you'll read the same story, but it might be a totally different experience based on whether you read it in print or not.
Yeah, and that seems to be a core of everything you're doing. There's always that multiplicity of ways. And I really like when you're, yeah, thinking about print, because there is with the digital, it does seem a lot of times like going to print, and comics are better at this because just the art has a different tactility on the page, whereas a novel, I'm surprised that novels being digital isn't more of a thing, because the physicality of the book matters not at all to the content.
Yeah,
Whereas, like,
or sometimes it's a detriment. Like like I'm a big A Song of Ice and Fire fan, and we've been waiting for like the sixth book to come out, and like it's not done. But part of the reason it's not done is that it's going to be so damn long that like it might not even be able to be printed in one book. Like there is a limit to how many pages you can put in a book, whereas
oh
like
shit,
digitally you could just put however many you want. You could put out one chapter a month or whatever.
yeah,
Like there's the physical side of it has more. You have to think about those practicalities way more than you do digitally. Like I'll just put together like PDFs of like I sent them to you like just hundreds of pages of my comics because I've got each individual comic as a PDF. And if like one thing I do on Patreon is like if I have because I have so many stories where like the character in this story might have appeared at least minorly in other stories. So what I'll do is I just like, okay, every story that they've ever appeared in, just collect it all into one PDF and drop it there. So like if you want to see everything that's happened with that person, there you go. You don't have to go and read everything. You just read what's relevant to this
hmm.
story. And like in book form, like that has no practical, like you can't just print an endless amount of like, this is all my stories with this character in one book, but then this is all my stories with this character. And there's a ton of overlap, but not
Yeah,
all of it. Like that just wouldn't work.
yeah, you're asking a lot of the reader to have like two big books where they share like 80
Yes,
pages a piece.
yes.
Yeah, there, man, shit, I hadn't thought about that. Like your work as it relates to library science too. Like you put it into a digital database and like kind of meta tag it, and like you could search all the pages that this character showed up in,
Yeah.
and you could put it in sequential order. You could put it in order of release date. Like that was another thing I was thinking about. Like, um, with your work is what would be the ideal, like, could, actually, let me ask you a question. Is there one name that in your head this all is, the project has a, like, you have the bottle cap series, you have these things, is there a name for the whole thing?
Not really. When I did, I have so some things that I do like, and I'll put them on Patreon sometimes, but like that the map that you were referring to before,
Yeah.
like I didn't create that with the mindset of like, oh, I'm gonna put this in this book and people are gonna think it's really cool. I created it because I literally was struggling to remember like I would put in certain comics like specific dates or whatever and didn't give any thought to like how those related to other dates and other comics. And so I put it together so I would know like, okay, this is about how long in between these stories actually takes place. Because like, there were some stories where I'd write them for present time, but by the time they were finished, it could be like 5 years later. So like
Yeah.
this comic that I'm finishing now, it technically takes place in 2017 or whatever. And it's like
Mm,
I got to remember that, because
yeah.
sometimes you'll want to put like modern stuff in, and then it's like, okay, but that doesn't make any sense anymore, because this is clearly before that ever existed, and now you're referencing it offhand or whatever. Like I would throw out like movie references or something, and it's like, okay, now I got to the point where I was like, okay, but was that movie out then? Like, was it, do I have to change that to something else? Like in Orange, um, they like there's a scene in issue 5 maybe where like they go to a movie. In the original script, it was Attack the Block that they were going to see, because at the time Attack the Block was only like a year or two old. But then by the time I got done with the issue, it had already been like 10 years old at
Mm,
that point. So I was like, okay, but if it's in theaters, then that's tying it to a pretty specific time period that's way in the past.
yeah.
And so like I ended up using I think I used the fictional um Hail movie that I referenced
Oh,
before.
okay.
That's part of why I started using fictional movies, because I was like, if I put this real movie, it ties it to a specific time, and I
Yeah.
didn't give enough thought to when these things took place. So I created that to centralize that idea. But what you were asking about before was I used to collect. I have these huge books where the the place I was getting stuff printed at, they could do a maximum of 700 pages. So
Mm,
every time I finished, like there was a point where I got to like 690 pages or something, or it was less than that, but like I got to a bunch of pages and I printed it up in one book altogether, and I just called it. It was 2011 to 2015. Like that was the title of it, and it was exactly as it sounds. It was every comic during that time period. So I've done a few collections of those, and I printed them up, and I've tried selling them, but they don't. I don't think I've ever actually sold one at a convention, because
it's just too
it's like
expensive.
yeah, it's like $35, and it's like 600 pages. It's this huge brick of a
That's pretty
book.
good for 600 pages, though.
Well, but it's like, when
Yeah.
people see like a $5 comic and then they see this huge brick of a thing, a lot of people are like, well, let me see if this is any good before I go and buy this. But again, like I did it just because like I had to go back and look at things for reference. Like I had to go back and look at characters, and I had to go back and look at like places and how I drew things, and so I could have the layouts look the same and whatnot. So like I did those for practical reasons, but I don't have no, I don't have like an overriding thing. Um,
Like
yeah,
what was the town's name again?
Garen.
Like the
Yeah,
Garen Project. There's not something like that you
no,
think about it as. It's
no. It
just your
would it would
work.
probably it would probably be called something like that, or whatever. Um, yeah. No, no, because I
Well,
still well like yeah, no. It's just like the reason I called that one series Bottle Caps is that like it's not a real series in the way that like Orange is like chapters 1 through 8, but it's like the the stories feature the same characters and kind of take place one after the other, and it's like
mhm.
they're not strictly. It's not like a direct sequel necessarily, but it's like it takes place after another thing, so there is some sort of chronological order to it. Um,
Yeah, you seem to have like three or four main groupings so
yeah,
far in the map. Like this is a bottle cap story. This is this story. This is the orange,
yeah,
which is
but
interesting.
even
That's why I was wondering if there was a bigger, like these are the subdivisions, and then this is the total set or whatever.
no, there are subdivisions, but there isn't a name for it. Would just I guess it would just be like the works of me. You know what I mean?
The
Like
complete Nicholas Offerman
yeah,
library.
yeah. It's like God, that was. I even thought of like doing a PDF of everything, and I was like, I don't know if it would open. Like I think Like I don't know how many, because even as it stands, like you do a PDF of like 700 pages of comics, and it's like typically like you have to go through the program crashing a few times before you can actually get all those files together and save them.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking is like, okay, like from a marketing standpoint, what would be the best way now? Like you've got your 2000 pages and you're really going to make a push. Like, how do you piece that out? This is the first one. Like, is it going to be collected? Is it going to, and I was thinking, like, how would I want it on my shelf the most? And I kept coming back to like, yeah, like they're all like these hardcovers you could pull out depending on the
Yeah,
length of the story. They're the size, but they're kind of like this. Doesn't really matter how you put them on the shelf, and it's such an interesting, peculiar, particular problem. uh
yeah.
yeah,
But that's what I
but
mean when I was talking about before about like not planning things out necessarily, or like a lot of these problems just sort of like pop up after the fact, and then it's like, oh yeah, like maybe it would have been better for me to just like call the whole thing bottle caps and just have like this is bottle caps one and this is bottle cap and just have everything in there, because there is a sense of like if you just have, even if they're like stories that have nothing to do with each other, if you have some sort of name attached to them, like that's like a common comics thing that people know and understand. And then when
yeah,
you're instead having like, well, this is one series and this is a different one and this is one standalone thing, like sometimes I try to keep it as concise as possible, because sometimes if you talk too much to people, especially at conventions, you just see the look in their eyes of like it's more complex than they thought it was going to be, and they just sort of lose interest, and it's like, oh, okay. And so I try not to overwhelm them.
well, and I think if you would have named it "This is Bottle Caps" and the modular nature of it would go away, because the
Yeah,
instinct of most people is, well, I'm not going to buy Bottle Caps 38 if I can't,
yeah,
like if I can't get
that's
number one. So it's much easier to be like, well, buy Do Geese See God? Like it's a funny story. It's a little wild.
yeah,
And I think, like you're saying, oh, I could have foreseen some of these problems, but you were following the integrity of the vision, and other problems would have arisen if you would have tried
yeah.
to not follow that. So like,
it
fuck
it's
it.
also yeah, it's also like as you try to figure out, especially when you're first starting out and you try to figure out what you're trying to figure out is tell the stories you want to tell and package them or present them in a way that other people are going to find interesting and want to buy and want to read. And it's like as you're trying to figure that out, it's like how maybe you would prefer, but not everyone feels the same way you do. So then you
Yeah.
come across like, you know, like for a while I was doing everything as black and white mini comics because I was like, that's the cheapest way. And that's what people are going to want. You want the most you can get for the cheapest possible amount. And then you find out that like that some people probably want that, but other people would rather spend way more to have like a better color version or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like at the time I was like broke and thinking like, yeah, you just want the cheapest and quickest way to get to everything. And it's like, well, no, sometimes you want the definitive version. You don't want the cheap version. And then you'd be like, okay, some people want full stories and like, but some people like serialized things and they like, picking up the new issue or whatever. And it's like to try pretty much what it came down to was eventually I just stopped caring and I just started, I'll just do it how I do it. And like there was a point where like the orange series, I would change the size while I was
hmm
printing it because I would change my, like one year I would want one thing and one year I would want something else. And then there are people like, oh, they're different sizes. Like I don't like this. And it's like, well, that's tough. Like that's the size it's coming in. It's not there isn't this isn't like a clothing store where you get to pick different colors or different sizes or whatever. Like that's one thing and that's the only version of it you can get.
Yeah. I think that's like the best you can do, because you'll drive
Yeah.
yourself crazy.
Yeah, and
Um,
I did for a number of years trying to I'll find the formula that will work for everybody, and it just doesn't exist.
well, in following your vision, you have created like I said, what I think is one of the best comic projects of all time, in my
Oh,
opinion.
thank
I
you.
think it far surpasses a lot of the stuff that's held up as the peaks of literary comics, at least because you have followed that vision to its fullest extent, and I think created, I mean, I don't know, I haven't read it everything, but it sets alone as something that doesn't work in the way anything else works, and is significantly better than most things because of it. And for people who like, just go buy like two or three of Nicholas's things, dip your toes in, but understand that it is a bigger project, and the more you buy, you'll continue to enjoy stuff, and you'll continue to enjoy it more. Like I said, I finished Orange, and I was like, holy fuck, I got to tell people about this book just based on the one book. And then as I progressed through it, I just got more and more kind of evangelical about it, I guess. So I really, really, if anyone even made it, we've been going for 3 hours, which is
Yeah, I was.
awesome. I appreciate. But really, really, please, I think Nicholas is somebody like one of the people, more than anything else I've talked about on this channel, that I want to make sure as many people go support as possible, because it's a phenomenal body of work. And I don't get the sense that you're going to be stopping anytime soon, no matter what.
No.
But there's, yeah, and you have a project with the creator that's been doing this for now, what, 12, 13 years? I mean, 2011 to now,
Yeah.
12 years, 13 years, um, 12 years. So it's someone that you could throw your weight behind to know they're going to keep going. But also at the same time, I think a project like this deserves that support. Like, we as a medium deserve for this thing to keep going. And so I just really, yeah, hope that this helps push more and more people to it, more and more people talking about it. Because I can't sing its praises enough. And I'm going to be honest, like I'm going to be stealing some of that strategy, because you opened up this mode in my mind of how I could approach. Like when you were talking earlier about, oh, maybe I could get someone else to draw it. That's been occurring to me as like, oh, fuck, if you could have these self-contained stories, you could collaborate with other people. And then that thing of like, my time is running out and I've got 5,000 ideas,
Yeah.
becomes a more solvable problem. And yeah, so even just as like inspiration for other creators to see a mode of operation that will allow them to not, I think so many people are so scared to even get started because of the monumentality of what's in their head, and realizing that you don't have to have the monument from the jump. I think your work shows that very well. So really, just, our medium deserves it. You as fans deserve to check this work out. You as creators deserve to be kind of inspired by this method of working, I think. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate your work, Nicholas, very much, obviously, and I appreciate you taking the time. I would keep talking all night, but I gotta go. My partner's sitting out there, probably like, this motherfucker been in there for three
Yeah.
hours. But dude, we got to keep in touch. We got to talk some more, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. No. Thanks. I appreciate it. You're one of the There's. I don't even know if there's another person who's actually read as much of it, because even the people who follow my work closely, they still only get like a fraction of it. It's not the whole complete thing. I don't know if there's that many more people besides me who have actually read just about every page of it.
So that's the thing that drove me fucking crazy by the time I was done with it, is like, why is no one talking about this? And then I was like, okay, well, he's got this problem of, you got a celebrity with the same name, so you're harder to search. Because when I went to
Yeah.
search you online, I couldn't, it was so fucking hard to find it.
Yeah.
But it was just like, there's these, like, that is a very stupid kind of superficial barrier. But just, yeah, the impressive scope of what you've done is an unfortunate limitation. And Like that's why I was like, I gotta just fucking talk about this thing and get other people understanding what this is that's out there. Because I bet a lot of people have read one or two of your things that are going to watch
Yeah.
this and they just don't know. So I just yeah,
That's why like
I hate that that's the case for you.
well, it's fine. It like even for people who like their primary thing is print, I would like I would advertise my Patreon thing because
Yeah.
that's like the cheapest and easiest way if you want to access everything, it's all on there. And then if you want from there to get into the physical side of things, because like there's like you're saying the limitations of it, like there's so many at this point that it's like it would cost a small fortune to just like if you wanted to buy every comic all at once. You know what I mean? Like some of them I probably aren't even actually in print as their own thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
there's a couple that I don't have in print that you kind of
yeah,
sent me. You sent me the
yeah.
individual PDF, so I didn't have to go through them. But yeah, I will put a link to Nicholas's Patreon. I will make sure that I do one of those little things that goes up here. Go to his Patreon. He's not charging. I mean, what, like how much? $1?
It's $1 a month just to read like the stuff as it comes out, and then $2 a month for all the like little PDF collections I put together that to sort of help you, backtrack and read everything.
Yeah, so really for $2, you could get the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and then get some of the stuff in print. And I cannot recommend it more. Well, maybe we'll put this at the beginning too, but like please go to Nicholas's Patreon, do yourself the favor of reading. If you can't afford it and you don't like reading digital, read it digital so you get a sense of the scope of what it was, and then you can start buying it piece by piece and get it physically, because there really is nothing else like this in comics that I know of. Even like the Hernandez brothers that have these ongoing stories, it just doesn't function this way. This is a bigger, wilder, to me better kind of thing. And so yeah, please hit up that Patreon. There's what, like 4 PDFs so far that are like the big bad that you can get it
yeah. I
big
do
chunks.
I do in big chunks or I do in smaller ones. There's a lot of there's also this new Patreon thing that I didn't quite figure out. It's called collections, which
Oh
essentially function the same way, but I didn't know how to use them when they first came in. And so some of them are like, it's like I added a bunch of pages to it and then it added new ones, but out of order, kind of. So I'm
yeah.
gonna have to go in and clean those up. But I think those could be very helpful because it might just be like entire issues in this one collection, this one place. But yeah, it's all there.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you again so much, Nicholas. I really appreciate it. And again, people, go to his Patreon, $2 for 2,000 pages worth of some of the best, most well written. And then the drawing starts out good, and just you never stall. You never become you're never like, this is what Nicholas Offerman is from here on out. He's continually improving his art and writing and stuff. So please, please go get that. Thanks everyone who made it for 3 hours. Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.